So good afternoon, everyone. Speak a little bit around the Public Procurement Bill, which was gazetted on the 19th of Feb this year. Basically, the Public Procurement Bill around, what does it seek to achieve? The Minister of Finance published the draft procurement bill for public comment, and currently the public bill is out with public comment closing on the 30th of June. So I believe that this webinar is actually an opportune time for us to discuss it, because we still have a few days in which we can respond, we can provide comment. The draft bill proposes a single regulatory framework for procurement applicable to all spheres of government, so national, provincial, local government, including our state-owned entities, Schedule 1, 2, and 3, and aims to eliminate the fragmentation in the laws that deal with public sector procurement. The bill proposes the repeal of the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act of 2000, and in doing so, it aims to do away with the preferential point system. I think this is one of the key takeaways from the bill. The bill creates a much more flexible procurement, preferential procurement system, and enables the minister to prescribe a framework for preferential procurement, which will advance economic opportunities for previously disadvantaged people, with specific provisions made for women, youth, people with disabilities, small businesses, locally produced goods, including technology and commercialization. So yes, the key areas of regulation in the bill are your general procurement requirements, an enabling framework for preferential procurement, the establishment of the public procurement regulator within National Treasury, which is new, determining the function of the provincial treasuries, measures to ensure integrity in the procurement process, the powers to prescribe different methods of procurement, one of which is procurement from other organs of state, which those in the public sector would commonly refer to as piggybacking. It also describes and prescribes bidding processes, the framework for supply chain management, dispute resolution mechanisms, and repeal and amendment laws. A lot of these regulations, a lot of these general rules around procurement do exist, so it's not completely new. It exists in our public sector space at the moment, be it from MFMA or PFMA perspective. However, they are quite fragmented in the sense that we often see them in different practice notes, instruction notes, circulars, and the bill pulls them all together, puts them in one place, creating a sort of a flip journal of one document that one can easily screen through. And if you are listening into this and you're from the public sector, you would know that when you look for your practice note, it's almost a bit of a mission going onto Treasury's website and then going through a document only to find out that it's been repealed or elements of it have been repealed, and then having to find the coordinating document that remedies that repeal. So one of the new elements within the bill is the role of the procurement regulator. And that role of the regulator is to be to be an impartial in the process. So the role of the regulator is to ensure at most and at the top of the list, ensure that institutions comply with the bill, to guide and support the officials and institutions in terms of executing and implementing on this bill, to promote and ensure integrity in the procurement system. So additional to that, to develop and implement measures to ensure transparency in the procurement process, to address serious or persistent material breaches of the Act, reconsider decisions of institutions where necessary. So this is again something a little bit different. It exists in our public sector, but a little bit different in that you have a regulator who's going to monitor and changes, continuously revise and provide guidance on procurement and procurement systems, establish and maintain registers, create and maintain one or more databases, and promote the use of technology in procurement. Again, we're seeing the use of technology come about a lot more in public sector, specifically in the new reforms such as, again, coming to the emphasis of the procurement regulators' roles within this act. One of the main points that Truman had asked me to pull together when preparing today was around my opinions as to whether the bill is going to alleviate historical challenges in the public sector, or is it just going to improve it? And I think that if someone has to go through this, someone has to go through the procurement bill, it's very easy to read. So I think there's a little bit of a difference from where we've come to where we're going. It's very easy to read, but a large portion of the act is coming from existing practice notes, it's coming from existing instruction notes and regulatory documents. But again, as someone who plays a lot in the public sector space, you would know that much of the regulatory documents that exist are ambiguous. You have documents that sometimes contradict each other. You've got loose pieces of information, paragraphs that don't necessarily talk to one another, etc. And the Act aims to alleviate some of those challenges. So from a personal perspective, I am very optimistic that it will ultimately improve our public sector procurement system. But again, it's something that I think we need to be very patient with. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. And just on a closing point, in terms of the message to public sector SCM officials, Truman asked me to pull together, what do I think would be a key point to take home? And I would say that, almost embrace it. We know that the bill is coming. We know that the intentions of the bill is to alleviate the challenges encountered in current procurement legislation, which is often fragmented and ambiguous, and sometimes hard to read and hard to implement in terms of practicality. The document is going to influence updates in your policy. It's going to influence updates in your SOP templates. So make sure you're covered. Be part of the process. Don't watch from the sidelines. I encourage you to go through the document. And, as mentioned at the very start, we still have till the 30th of June to send comments to Treasury. So definitely, if you can, go through, add in your comments. You know what your challenges are. You know what regulations have sometimes been a challenge in terms of implementation. Look at how it's addressed in the bill and, provide your comment. I think that's the key takeaway from here. Thank you. Back to you, Truman.
So, Jill, if you can just give us your views in terms of the objective, or should I say the benevolent intent of this procurement bill that's underway, and also perhaps just giving us a little bit of overview in terms of the current court cases and how the current bill is going to help us, or should I say the public sector supply chain professionals, to basically be able to deliver on their responsibility, but over and above that, be able to be compliant and also add value in what they do.
Okay, great. Yes, the previous speaker, I agree with most of what she said, except that most of the stuff that is in this new bill is exactly as we're doing it right now. The only thing that worries me is that if you look at the primary objective of the bill, it talks about section 217(2) and 3, but they don't actually say that the section 217(1), which says it must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. They don't talk much about that. And the other thing that worries me is that it says the minister must prescribe a framework for preferential treatment of categories. Now, the Constitution in section 217(1) says National Treasury must prescribe the framework. So who is now going to prescribe this new framework if we're going to do away with the triple PFA? And secondly, I see that we already have the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer and a Chief Procurement Officer within National Treasury. So I don't know if that person is going to take over from or going to be part of the regulator that they talk about. And also then we're going to also have, it looks like, a tribunal to look at disputes. Then I see on section 36, it says an institution may deviate from the opening of bids as provided for in the bid. Now that doesn't sound very good, because if they're allowed to just change their minds as they go along, can you imagine the chaos there will be in the procurement system? Also, it says just some of the smaller things that I picked up. Recordings of meetings can be in writing or electronic. Now, at the moment, they have to be done in both, because, you know, if a person is taking minutes of a meeting, you're not writing down everything everyone says. But if you've got a recording, at least you've got a recording of everything that took place. They also talk about pre-qualified bidders must not be rejected for arithmetical errors or a discrepancy between the written and figures in their form of offer. Now, again, this is going to cause huge confusion and chaos, because if everyone is told that it doesn't matter if you've made an arithmetic error, we're going to sort it out when we're doing the evaluation, but you were pre-qualified, so you don't have to worry about it. We will do the checking. This is going to also cause a lot more work for the public sector. If we look at, you know, I don't know if any of you have seen Phoebe Bolton's book. She's a law lecturer in Cape Town University, and almost 98% of the cases from suppliers against government have been won by the suppliers. Very few cases have been won by government. And when I talk to the various departments, like Department of Health has got billions of rands worth of legal suits against them. Some of them are tenders. Northwest provincial government is telling me that they got 2.6 billion rands worth of court cases they have to settle with suppliers. And if you go through a lot of the court cases that are in her book, you will notice that it is because we've stepped outside of the legislative environment that has caused all these people to be successful in suing the state. So I'm wondering if this new bill is going to do anything at all to assist us going forward.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Jill. I'm not sure, was that your last comment?
You know, there's so much to talk about, and
yes.
you told us to keep it short and sweet. So if you want, if you want me to, I'll carry on all afternoon. But I'm sure there's lots of other people who want to be heard. So,
yeah, no, definitely. But you know, there's one thing that perhaps everyone would be interested on in terms of just the number of outstanding cases. Just to highlight one province, I know recently we were talking about Northwest. So if you can just highlight for us in terms of that province and anything that you might actually have of your head, you know, that you can actually share for any province in as far as the number of outstanding procurement-related cases is concerned and the amount thereof.
Oh, okay. Look, I can't give you the number.
Briefly, okay.
Yeah, no, I can't give you a number because there are outstanding court cases from just about every province and every department throughout the country. But what I can tell you is some of the departments that have actually spoken about these legal suits against them. Public Works, for instance, they're always in court. So are Transnet. In fact, the lawyers have a joke, a standing joke about Transnet, because they say if you want to get rich quick as a lawyer, just go and take on a few of Transnet's cases because there's plenty of them every month. So, you know, it's not actually very nice to hear lawyers talking like that because they're the only people that are succeeding. But it's all because we don't know whether it's the accounting officer that gives illegal instructions or whether it's the politicians that tell us to do things that we shouldn't be doing. But whatever the reasons are, we're stepping outside of that legislative environment. And the minute we do that, we don't have any protection. And that is when our suppliers, who are now becoming very familiar with the legislation for public sector procurement, are seeing the gap and taking us to court. And straight away, many of these court cases have been against the constitutional provisions, and it's very easy to win if you're saying that it's unconstitutional as far as the suppliers are concerned. And also, if you look at the various court cases that have been heard over the years, again, it's people that are sitting on the bid committees that have spoken out of line. Some obviously did it purposely because they could see that something fraudulent was happening, and they wanted to tell the people that they must actually take it further. And on other instances, it was because they didn't like who was being awarded the contract. And it's all sorts of different reasons why we've got so many cases against us. And also, of course, you've got the other people who they just feel aggrieved that they didn't get the contract or they didn't get the tender award. So they put in these made up or what's the word I'm looking for? Perceived grievances against government, and sometimes they actually succeed because it's seen that we've neglected to take into a certain type of a piece of legislation into account. Yeah,
absolutely.
So at the moment, as I said, last year when I was in Northwest, I was speaking to some of the legal guys who were attending some risk management training with me, and they just said they had 242 billion, I beg your pardon, outstanding court cases that they had to settle. And as I said, the Department of Health also has plenty against for supplying. We've heard about cases that have been in the news where one of the hospitals was given incubators and they don't even have a maternity section, but whoever arranged the contract needed to spend so much money to get their kickback of 10%. So it's not just one thing that's causing the problem, it's all sorts of things that are actually causing these problems.
And Jill, if I may come in there, thank you so much for that. And again, we just realized the impact of non-compliance, but most importantly, what then becomes even more critical is having the right people in our procurement roles in public sector. And not only that, also making sure that these bills, because unfortunately, we had a little bit of a connection issue at the beginning. So I was going to highlight that, just to give a little bit of an overview as to why this discussion is important, not only for public sector supply chain professionals, but also for SMMEs, because procurement is not really, just a profession, or supply chain as a whole. It's not just a profession or a function, just like any other function. There's a lot of spend that gets spent through procurement, structures that we have in place. So people in those roles, in our supply chain management roles in public sector, specifically in this instance, need to be really wary of all these consequences, but even most importantly, also understanding that the bill at its draft stage at the moment, but it's very important for us to make sure that we don't find ourselves, after the bill has been promulgated, that we haven't really taken time to digest it and to also critique if really the people behind the bill and all the consideration that is going to come after that Is it really going to be from people that were supposed to be commenting on the bill, or it was just, you know, a random selection type of thing? So with that being said, Jill, thank you so much. I'm not sure if you've got any closing remarks before we move on to the next panelist.
Yes, I do. I just want to raise the clause 15, where it's going to be encouraged to use information, communication and technology wherever possible in the procurement process. Now that means that Treasury has never given anybody permission except the Independent Electoral Directorate to do online tendering. And one of the reasons was because many of our SMMEs are not, do not have the facilities. And so now if we're going to say that we're going to use online tendering processes, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of SMMEs that will lose out because they won't even know that there's work available because they're not computerized. So, you know, it can also be detrimental to SMMEs.
Yes, and I couldn't agree with you more. And you're touching on a very important topic there in terms of digital procurement processes. So Alan is going to be talking to us about that. And again, talking about SMMEs, we've got one of our esteemed guests, Kukuletu Kaba and Tolang Tsabo, who are going to be sharing their insights as well in as far as SMMEs are concerned. But without any further ado, let me bring our next speaker. His name is Songezo Mabeke. So he's going to be coming in the space or the place of Brian Matebula. Songezo is very much passionate as well about procurement. He's in the public procurement space as a procurement specialist working for the competition commissioner. Songezo, over to you, sir. If you can just give us your insights, my brother, around the court issues that we've been talking about, that you also been very much vocal about in as far as this bill is concerned.
Good day, sir. Thank you so much for your time, Truman. I hasten. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for your time, Truman. I hasten. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I hasten to say I didn't know I had to make this presentation until so you beg my I beg your pardon for speaking again on issues that possibly might have been touched on, because for the last 5 minutes at least my attention was just at attending to this aspect of what I believe will assist. You know, one of the great banes of the system currently is civil courts are clogged up in disputes that could be dealt with elsewhere. I'm saying this predicated on the fact that when you look at where I'm currently employed, we're talking about the Competition Commission. The competition authorities, the Competition Commission, the Competition Tribunal, as well as the Competition Appeal Court, specialist institutions that deal in specifically economic, let me call them crimes for lack of a better term, or economic questions in relation to how competition is regulated.
Yeah.
Competition Commission is not per se a Chapter 9 institution, but its content and its character is very much that of a Chapter 9 institution. It has a founding act, the Competition Act, and those who work on that Competition Act owe their fidelity to two institutions, the Competition Act itself and the Constitution. The same is said of the Public Protector. The same is said of the Auditor General, for instance. So one of the persons last week highlighted, Mr. Makube, highlighted the fact that there isn't sufficient independence of this regulator. And I'm coming to the court question. You see, when you locate this procurement authority within the National Treasury, what essentially you are doing is you are taking away those inherent powers of independence, right? Now, what that achieves essentially is the real power base doesn't rest with the regulator, but potentially with the political space or the politician. Now, let's go back to how the structure of the Competition Commission works. The only matter that is the province of the ministry is articulated in the Act. Disputes come from the commission to the tribunal, from the tribunal into the court system. The level of the Competition Appeals Court equivalent is that of the Supreme Court of Appeal. From the Competition Appeals Court, the matter goes straight away to the Constitutional Court. Now, why could we not, on the thinking behind that, copy and paste, if you like, for this particular institution? Why? Public procurement is foundational to the delivery of South Africa's socio-economic rights.
Yeah.
Think of all pay. Everything that could go wrong in a procurement did go wrong on all pay and cash paymaster services. This matter right now is not settled because SASSA or its agents are still having problems with the distribution of social grants. I'm saying this despite the interventions of the Constitutional Court as early as its first judgment in 2013. There have been 4 judgments in relation to that. I'm saying this is a problem because when you clog up the civil court system with, among others, problems in the public sector, there really should be a designated arm within the government entity or enterprise of dispute settlement that is solely focused on that. You've got the same thing with the Electoral Commission. I mean, the Electoral Act makes provision for an electoral court. Tax court is there. There's a land claims court that's there for specific questions on specific areas of our public discourse. Why not public procurement when we know everything we know about the troubles of public procurement? This act seeks to regulate and harmonize the system. And yet you can go to any practitioner. They will tell you about the convolution and the spaghetti bowl effect simply because of PFMA, MFMA, specific industry acts like CIDB, Arms Corps. You've got Parliament that has its own rules. Why can we then not develop a coherent jurisprudence through a designated dispute settlement system that will have more people participating on the same subjects more and more? And then you can take out the question of legal certainty. More importantly, if not most importantly, time. You will be lucky if you get a date within 12 months. I beg your pardon, I just need to open the gate. You'll be lucky if you get an appointment within 12 months in the High Courts anyway. And this is something that the Chief Justice has lamented time and again. The civil procedure or the civil courts are clogged up with disputes that could be dealt with on other competent fora. If you really want to get into the Constitution, it becomes a question of access to courts. It becomes a question of access to justice. Imagine a small player who has won a contract and a big player starts throwing money at the problem with constitutional litigation. How long that matter will take for it being settled? At which point will the small player run out of funds or appetite or resources other than money to fight this thing? Whereas if the regulator, the tribunal, if the parties are not settled there, you go to a public procurement court which is ready to hear these disputes and these disputes alone, with people who are designated to hear these kinds of disputes with a jurisprudence that is familiar to them. It does so much to take care of what Justice Mogoeng has constantly lamented throughout his time, the slow case management system that is currently at play.
Yeah.
That's then when, especially at tribunal level, you can marry the lawyers and the commercial practitioners. I'm talking about supply chain and procurement, the interface at tribunal level, because as a lawyer, I won't know everything about supply chain. And the opposite is true for supply chain practitioners in relation to procurement. It's law and it is that engagement at tribunal level, which I would argue are some of the persons who should be there to review these decisions of the regulator, that when you take to the courts, you're now dealing strictly in the law, not so much about the regulation, if you like, of the contract. But let's now go to what the law says in relation to what happened and what should be the best way possible to deal with this issue. That's why my passion is at assuming we achieve all of this promise that we are also trying to make through our comments that will be submitted to the relevant portfolio committee happen. Assume the best. We will still have what is a bane in relation to procurement, the settlement of disputes timeously. Yep. Imagine if a dam has to be constructed or a bridge between two provinces or a rural community and access to tertiary services in town collapses. And then it is bogged down by nothing else but by litigation. 2 years, 3 years. The denial of those socio-economic rights, the denial of that public service being delivered. What then does it do for the people? What does it do for the people? That's all I have to say on this. I'm outside really getting into the deep technical issues, but I think my contribution must be limited to thinking and to understand why it is imperative and necessary to have a designated institution from once the tribunal decision has been made to take care of things. We get to the tribunal, it's taken how long it has taken, and then you go back to the civil courts. So in other words, currently, as the law reads, you are adding 2 layers to a public procurement dispute. An examination by the regulator, and then a hearing, if you like, by the tribunal. And then if you are not happy, because it says in section 105, a review in terms of this part constitutes an internal remedy as envisaged in section 7.2 of PAJA. So once you've gone through the tribunal, now you've exhausted internal procedures. Only then you can go to court. Whereas currently, if you are not happy with the decision maker's decision, the administrator, and you've exhausted internal procedures, then you can go to court. So currently we've added 2 layers to go back to the same court.
And one would ask, is that sensible? So thank you so much, Songezo. That was really a mouthful. So maybe just one quibble. So thank you so much, Songezo. That was really a mouthful. So maybe just one question. One might be asking, from the audience. They might be asking, so how do we go? Because, that's such a great idea to have that sort of segregation, or should I say, that independent procurement court, as it were. So in your view, what would be the channels or the things that, say public sector supply chain practitioners, procurement professionals, all combined with, say, the general public at large, if they were to speak in one voice for such a court to be established, what would be the channel? Any views around that?
Just define channel very briefly.
Okay, so just like in terms of the current procurement bill, that there's a process that we need to follow. There's, public comments that have been solicited. So if we were to basically, yes, do you get me now?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, fantastic.
Sorry to engage the Department of Justice, because all courts with judges who hand down judgments that have the weight and forceful effect of judgments, that's the province of the Department of Justice. So if you like, you would have to have an interdepartmental conversation. That's the portfolio committee now on finance, because this is to whom currently this debate rests, or with whom this debate rests, with the Department of Constitutional Development and Correctional Services, Minister Lamola. That's a conversation now between Minister Mboweni and Minister Lamola, because it's a province of justice. Right now, Minister Mboweni ultimately controls the regulator, controls in inverted commas, of course, controls the regulator and the tribunal. And then once you talk about courts, it's the public through the Minister of the Justice Department. So right now, it might be something that's going to take a bit more time because it obviously isn't contemplated, and it now involves another department altogether. And that becomes a justice question: where are they going to come from? Who's going to be funding it? Where are those funds going to come from? Where is its seat going to be? All of those logistical questions.
Yep.
I still think it's a worthy investment in this country. It is necessary. It is ultimately a question of justice. When South Africans do not enjoy the promise of the Constitution because services are delayed, thus denied, then it becomes a question of denial of fundamental constitutional rights. And we are seeing it, unfortunately, happening now. People are desperate. They have had some of the most basic constitutional rights being limited. I'm not going to say infringed. That's a pronouncement of a court, but they certainly have been limited. You cannot move as you want to. You cannot trade as you want to. Now, what is there to compensate for that? What are some of the government services that have been pronounced through the regulations that are available for that? And are these coming to the people within the time that they should be reasonably filtering down to the people? This is all then a 217 competency. There must be equity. There must be fairness. There must be transparency. There must be cost effectiveness. There must be competition. That's how you build a capable state.
Right. Songezo, I take it that those are... Right. Songezo, I take it that those are your last remarks. Thank you so much for that. So now, I know we can spend the whole day talking about this issue. I know it's something that is very close to your heart. And, you know, I think even everyone that is here today attending this conversation has an interest. And I'm going to bring Kukuletu Kaba, who's also very much passionate about SMMEs. He's an entrepreneur. He's a founder of APICS Holdings. He's also spearheading an initiative called Amandla Omnoto, which is also a very driving force in terms of empowering SMMEs in South Africa, not only in KZN, in Gauteng, he's all over, but I'm just going to bring him in. Kukuletu, if you can just come in. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Bob Hadebe, thank you. Greetings to everybody. I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. Yes, sir. So if you can just share in terms of your insights and as far as the struggles that SMMEs normally go through in as far as procurement matters are concerned, and not only that, what has also been your challenge, you know, on a personal level, running the businesses that you run, and also in terms of SMMEs, what would you say in as far as public sector procurement is concerned, and being the office that is able to channel economic development, not only for SMMEs, but you know, you'll be talking about SMMEs specifically. How can the office of the chief procurement officer be an instrument to emancipate SMMEs and local economic development, as well as the economic development of South Africa as a state? Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Truman. Greetings to everyone. I had hoped, Truman, I would just sit here, passively listen and get educated, but since you've just allowed me this space to share briefly, I'll really share very briefly. As you have rightfully pointed out, we're dealing very much in the space of enterprise development, seeking to assist entrepreneurs to really identify quality opportunities so that they can participate therein. So right across the spectrum of private sector as well as public sector. But you would know as much as I do that public sector is that engine that should assist entrepreneurs to really get emancipated and really grow to a level where they can participate in the mainstream economy. There is granted a number of challenges that entrepreneurs have experienced and are continuing to experience. I think one person, as we started, the lady, I can't remember the name, sorry, spoke about a lot of things, including issues of the stuff where there's a whole lot of wrong things that are happening within the system of procurement. We're looking at all of those things. We've had a number of entrepreneurs suffering from the supply chain processes of government, and obviously even issues of corruption as an example, which is very, very much of a sore point in this space. To even maybe highlight something that probably many of you will hear more about down the road in the next month or so, is the launch of a watchdog that is going to be very aggressive in addressing things that entrepreneurs, especially SMMEs at the second tier of economy, are experiencing in relation to issues that are being discussed here. So this again is one sort of like creation of that comes out of the frustration that entrepreneurs are experiencing. So I won't say much really, because I think I sent you a WhatsApp message to say I need to engage you as experts in particular in this field from our platform of Amanda Umnoto, as you have said, where we sit with over 10,000 entrepreneurs in our system who are driving and helping to ensure they participate in the economy. But what we are talking about right now is going to be very, very fundamental in ensuring that these entrepreneurs move up the rung, as it were, in terms of their activity. So we'll be able to discuss and engage you as experts in the SCM space, what I'm not, and be able to get your guidance as well in terms of how do we work with you and collaborate to ensure we lessen these types of problems that entrepreneurs are experiencing, especially in my space.
Okay, Nongos, thank you so much. That's definitely okay. Nongos, thank you so much. That's definitely something that one would be willing to look into. And you know me, so I would really be honored. It would really be great to engage in such discussions. So moving right along in the next 5 minutes. So Tolang, if you can just come in. I'm not sure if you can hear me as well. So if you can just give me a sign, thumbs up or raise your hand. If you can just come in and add to what Ukukuletu was saying in as far as SMMEs are concerned. I know you are also working very closely with SETA, driving mentorship programs for SMMEs in KZN and other provinces. So if you could just share with us your sentiments around what the other speakers have already shared, but specifically the challenges that you might have encountered as well, or your clients, which are SMMEs might have encountered in as far as the procurement process rather is concerned.
Thank you very much, Truman. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thank you to be on this platform, sharing a very important information. My name is Tolang Tsabo from Meltra Consulting. We are primarily the accountants focusing on the accounting, tax and business support services and mentoring and coaching. We don't end up only on ensuring that our SMMEs are compliant, but we are playing a key role in terms of developing them. I think whatever that has been said, Truman, one will be talking from a complainant point of view. Unfortunately, whatever that has been said, it boils down to the SMMEs. Whatever that is a shortcoming or shortfall of any bill that is passed, the recipients of all that are SMMEs. And I think that's very, very unfortunate, to an extent that one would comment that our SMME sector in South Africa is very, very small. We can identify and acknowledge those attempts that have been made by government to grow and try to develop the SMME sector. But unfortunately, it seems like we still have more challenges than the successes that we should have gained by now. So this makes one wonder, playing a key role in terms of enterprise development from SMME point of view, that if the new bill, has it been designed with the eyes that have looked deeper into the challenges that our SMMEs are facing in South Africa? Surely from the discussions that we are having, it looks like the bill will be passed having followed the due processes, but we might remain with the challenges that our SMMEs are facing. Maybe trying to probe into some of the challenges that SMMEs are facing. The first one will be coming from the practitioners themselves. What is the rate that the practitioners in the public sector adopt or understand these bills or the new changes in the bills, such that when they interact with SMMEs, they are talking from the new bill? I can tell you, Truman, that from my experience, there are some amendments, for example, in the BE codes or whatsoever that have happened. We are still struggling even today in the public sector, in your municipalities, in your department, in terms of the practitioners articulating to the SMMEs these new changes in the bills. So that remains the challenge, the rate at which the practitioners in the public sector are quick to comprehend these changes, such that when they interact with the SMMEs, we talk one language. We still have a big gap there. So now the challenge again is, the new bill is coming. At what rate? As we speak now, I'm not sure who are the people in this platform. Where are the public service practitioners in the municipalities, in the departments, to understand the effect of the new bill? So it remains a challenge, and that's where a lot of our SMME get frustrated when they submit whatever the document. Again, coming to the issue of SMMEs, I know that these are business people that are assumed that they are equipped enough to understand these changes in these bills, whatever in the procurement system. But the reality is, not all guys are quick to understand these changes. What are the initiatives that are taken by government in terms of empowering the SMMEs? Rightfully, yes, the calls will be made to comment on the bill, but the truth is going down there. Only few SMMEs are even engaging in the discussions that we are having. Yet the bill will have impact in terms of how they interact or do business with the state. So I'm not sure if ever there are other further initiatives that are done in terms of explaining in the simplest terms these new changes to the SMMEs. The SETA has passed with SMME sector Truman and the members. There is this assumption that these guys are established. The guys are not established. You have SMMEs coming into the industry. After 10 years, they've collapsed due to the challenges that are presented in business, among others that are presented by the procurement system. You have someone registering the company again. This is the cycle of SMME in South Africa. And if we think they are big enough to understand these changes, I think that is another gap in the bill that will likely to experience before we amend it again. I want to talk about again the issue of technology, like our expert indicated that the bill has that element of technology. Unfortunately, again, our SMMEs are not that much equipped again in terms of interacting with these technologies. I know that, for example, government has initiated a number of platforms that are technologically driven, your CLT, your e-filing, your integration and all that. I can tell you even today, we are still battling with the SMMEs. We are trying to assist them to be compliant, but the level of understanding again is very, very low. Yes, it is upon themselves, but government has to play a key role in terms of making sure that the systems talk to the SMMEs and enable them to grow. And again, on that technological part, that will come to cost elements that we cannot run away. Unfortunately, the bill is being passed at a very, very critical time of COVID-19, whereby we are going to see a lot of companies collapsing. So if things are going harder in terms of technology than being easy, I'm not sure if ever the bill has been presented or developed from a point. That's why in my beginning I said, I'm not sure if ever it's done, having critically looked at the challenges that SMEs are facing in South Africa. So it's going to be another challenge. Again, the over-reliance on the technology from the practitioners and SMEs, I think it's going to be a challenge again, because the systems are there, technology is there, but it doesn't replace the human factor, of which is another challenge in this space. The last point, Truman, political interference. The amendments of these bills, is it solving the issue of political interference? Is there assurance that is given to the SMEs that whatever that is being amended, it will not be interfered from a political point of view? Whatever we have raised the issue of, for example, what is the right word that I want to use? The people who will be monitoring this from the departments, from ministry, who is having that? All these are politicians. What is the assurance to say that to the SME in South Africa, whatever the bill will ensure that there is no political interference, there is no victimization also from the SMEs. So the main challenge, Truman, from SME point of view, whatever that is being done, has it taken into consideration the challenges that SMEs are facing in South Africa? Will it help the SMEs to grow in South Africa? I think those are my inputs. That's why I said maybe one will be coming from a companion point of view. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but that's why you are here, because you are representing SMEs, and thank you for that input, Tholang. So moving right along, so just before we go to the next speaker, so I just want to highlight that you've raised something very important, and also Gugulethu did mention a lot of challenges that is also picked up, in as far as our public sector procurement processes are concerned. But I must say, without taking any side, I must also say that if we are talking about SMEs, we're not necessarily talking about entrepreneurs, because one would argue, I see some of the comments coming through, one would argue that what kind of an entrepreneur would not make ways to actually adapt with the times, utilize whatever systems that government has decided to basically utilize, in all again in the spirit or as a trajectory, a new trajectory, to make sure that in terms of efficiencies and effectiveness, that the procurement processes, the way in which suppliers are appointed, the way in which procurement opportunities are made available, it is done in such a way that would be also efficient, and for those that are at the receiving end to be able to align themselves to make sure that when such things are put in place or such systems are put in place, they are ready to basically run with those systems. But thank you so much for that. So moving right along, still talking about digital procurement, I'm going to invite Alan Hailton. He's one of the very successful entrepreneurs in South Africa. He's an African European brother. He's been also serving under the Black Business Council, and he's also been very much involved with SMEs, but currently he's the managing director of the company called Blue Africa, which he's going to be sharing with us shortly in terms of how have they been able to get involved to assist SMMEs and big businesses in as far as digital procurement is concerned, and also why what he would basically advise, not the why, just, what would be your advice, Alan, to public sector procurement professionals that have not really seen the importance of driving digital procurement in as far as our public sector procurement is concerned, and also also highlighting the status quo at the moment. Are we ready for that? Thank you. Over to you, Alan.
Okay, thanks, Truman. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to keep this brief. Okay, thanks, Truman. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to keep this brief, but my experience as a ex-EY, oh God, I'm losing my words already. So I represented EY advisory center, yeah. So we were responsible for the public procurement activities. So did a lot of work within the public sector. And I'm very familiar with the thought practices, both from an operational and systems side of how they currently perform. And there's a big gap. There's big opportunities. We're all aware of the challenges currently that they face: fraud, corruption, inefficiencies, etc. I could go on. So I left EY with a sole purpose of setting up digital facilities to help facilitate that change. And it's been ongoing now for 3-4 years with, I would say, very little success, certainly on the public sector side, in terms of getting digitalization into those areas, those key functions that really do need, digital transformation ideas and concepts. I was very surprised when I read the bill to see how, yes, they do touch on the need for technology within the public sector. However, it seems to be very vague. It's very vague in terms of, well, you can do it if you want to, but you don't have to. So it's very vague on that, which is quite surprising, because the benefits that could be derived from the implementation of procurement practices that are technology and digitally driven are immense. There are workflows that would dictate how things are done and cannot be circumvented. Workflows that will assign responsibilities to only certain people. Everything becomes transparent. Everything becomes efficient. Everything becomes governance driven. It's undeniable the benefits that public sector could and would derive from the implementation of technology-driven practices within the supply chain and procurement of the public sectors. So, I've made a few notes, and a lot of people have touched on technology as an issue. A lot of concerns about the use of technology with SMMEs, and there's a big debate you can argue all day on this particular issue, but I want to sidestep that and just focus on the use of technology within public sectors in business. And we have to make that assumption that everybody has to get up to a point where they are able to use technology to facilitate transactions. I think we have to get over that point of SMMEs having to get up to speed and on board. Otherwise we're going to be waiting for them to catch up, and meanwhile the whole country potentially could be falling back whilst we're waiting for SMMEs to get up on board. The technology is there. I hope that doesn't come across too harsh, but it is the reality. We are moving, and we cannot stop the boat. So the use of technology would eliminate, to a large degree, the amount of fraud that we're currently seeing in the public sector, and we could eradicate a lot of the those activities that are hindering us. So what measures have been taken to ensure the effective implementation of new or how we will measure? I mean, for me, implementation is a key factor here. Once we've got the act in place, my view would be that it has to be digitalized. Everything that has been agreed and set in stone has to be digitalized. And for national, local, and provincial, everybody has to abide by these guidelines, a blueprint of what activities need to be happening within the procurement space. And this can be laid out such that there's a process flow, there's a workflow. Everything is done in accordance with an agreement across all sectors. And those process flows need to be followed, cannot be circumvented. So, I am concerned about the implementation of the Act just as much as the Act itself. I am concerned about implementation and how that's going to be monitored and measured. That's been something that's been sorely missing in the past and currently, actually. So the implementation of good policies has been a long challenge, it's been a challenge in SA. So the effective measurement of the Act is critical in my view, if it's to have the positive influence that's needed, in order to transform the public sector procurement. So for me, I'm interested in who decides also what policies go through. I'm curious about the vagueness of the bill and also its approach towards technology, as I've said. So, who decides what elements of the draft bill that we are promulgating, putting forward, who decides what goes ahead? That for me is still very vague. It deviates somewhat from my technology side of things, but it is a concern and something that we do need to understand. So Chairman, I could go on. The list of benefits are endless for technology. All I'm saying is that I have a strategy that I believe could work. I myself employ and embed technology-driven solutions within organizations, public and private. So I'm happy to discuss that with anyone. But, I have this vision of technology-driven public sector procurement with a common platform that allows the smooth operation of all activities that are procurement related and supply chain related, access to information online, nothing further is manual. Systems legacy systems such as SAP really need to be reviewed, and we really need to start looking at systems that are more user-friendly and intuitive. That really is key for me, because at the moment, the current systems that are in place within the public sector does not contribute to the efficiencies within those functions. So, I think I'll leave it there for the moment. And if there's any questions, please feel free.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you for your insights, Alan. And I would certainly agree with your views, but perhaps slightly deviating that, you put it a little bit differently to say that the approach could be in phases, as opposed to just saying that everything must go digital. But maybe also to accommodate that the type of SMEs that might be moving in a little bit of a slow pace, they could possibly adopt a hybrid approach to say, yes, we're going to go digital. However, for those that might still be struggling, maybe they make an option for them to be able to do that. But I'm not going to dive into that much. But I it's a very interesting discussion. And our next, well, not the next speaker per se, but he was supposed to join us a little bit earlier, Dr. Manyati. Sakiwe is just trying to connect, so he's going to be giving us his insights as well. He's a procurement expert, public sector procurement, to be more specific, and he's done a lot of work with National Treasury. So we look forward to his insights. But at the interim, there's a very important question that has been asked by one of the delegates. So I'm just going to go to the question. I'm not sure. Sengezo, are you still there, my brother? Sengezo?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. I'm not sure if you did get the question from Zetu in the chats. Must I just read it loud for you?
Go for it, but I can see it.
Okay, great. So let me just read it out loud. So Zetu is asking, on the procurement bill, is it on the autonomy dilemma it presents in terms of the regulator versus the support role that National Treasury's Chief Procurement Office plays? Currently, the bill is not reflective of this segregation.
I will preface my response by simply saying that I haven't certainly exhausted that question as I was going through the bill, but ultimately it does predicate itself on the question of true independence, ultimately. You see, when you have a regulatory body being established, that body should merely notify the responsible ministry of what's going on, as opposed to, in my view, report to. Reporting to establishes lines, it establishes authority, it establishes obligations and the kind. Whereas when you simply inform or let know through your reports in terms of what's going on, to make sure from the political space to the authority that there is work being done, work that is, because of the Act and through the Constitution's operations, effecting a mandate that ought to make South African lives better. That would be my point of departure on that. So there was a concern last week raised that it is located within the National Treasury already takes away that question of independence.
Sure.
The Chief Procurement Office should be consumed, in my view, by this regulatory body. It should be consumed and manned as such, and part of its work, because it has developed IP, institutional memory, and all of those things in any event, since its establishing, never mind the fact that some of its wings have been clipped since, but it has got some work that it has done that would be absolutely useful for the regulator once it becomes a self-standing institution. That then should create hitting the ground running type effect.
Yep.
I'm not so sure if I answered the question fully, but to the extent that we're talking about the Chief Procurement Office as it now exists, I don't see it going back to National Treasury, because it's almost like a unit within the broader Treasury or a division or proper department. So it would best function in the regulatory space. And of course, I don't imagine this conversation is the only one that raises the concern of the regulator being housed within National Treasury itself, with the possible effect or likely outcome of clipping its wings for the purposes of independence. It should be a standalone institution of equal character, content, and value. And I keep referring to the Competition Commission. It doesn't have to be a Chapter 9 institution. The Commission isn't a Chapter 9 institution, but in the structure of the Act and how it works, it is completely independent. So
yes.
It owes its fidelity to the Act. Similarly, this regulator should owe its fidelity to this ultimately Act and to the Constitution. And where a party is not satisfied with an outcome of the regulator, there's a tribunal already, we know that. And my suggestion is early on, it should go straight to the courts from there instead of going through back end of the convoluted process as currently now is employed and in play.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think you've already covered the question. And you know what also becomes very important, like you rightly mentioned, maybe you put it a little bit different, but the office of the CPO, in my view, again, this is one of the discussions that have been going around. A lot of professionals are concerned, supply chain professionals that I'm talking about the office of the CPO being housed within National Treasury. Procurement, as we all know, procurement, and this has also been said by the likes of Dr. Boateng, who's also been very vocal about that office, to say that it should be independent. And perhaps, and I would just say, again, in terms of the the recommendations around that a lot of people felt that office should actually be under the Department of Trade and Industry, because it's about, trade. Procurement is trade. Procurement is about movement of goods and services, and that transformational aspect as well, the transformation mandate. So how is it going to happen and be able to address all these issues, the office of the CPO, if it's sitting under National Treasury? Because already there's a conflict. Treasury is concerned about the public purse. They would want to, they may not understand some of the supply chain, issues fully. Whereas if that office was independent, then it would be able to drive a true enterprise development, true transformation, whether for SMMEs and different, sector codes that are already in place, they'll be able to drive that mandate. But in its current structure, it is not able to function and serve that objective due to that limitation.
May I engage on that?
Yeah.
Section 217 falls within Chapter 13 of the Constitution. Chapter 13 of the Constitution is finance. Okay? So when we are talking anything to do with the nation's finances, general financial matters, that has got to be the province of Treasury. I'm in disagreement, therefore, with the suggestion that it could be better located in trade and industry for that reason. We are here looking to regulate how South Africa's public funds are being spent. As a byproduct, perhaps, yes, certainly, we could develop trade, because ultimately it is the transformative text and context of this constitution that should have such effects. It's a transformative document, this. So if trade is a beneficiary thereof, then let it be. Just as justice and constitutional development, the Constitution is a beneficiary. The Constitution tells us this falls under finance, Section 217, if you go and check. So you can't now dislocate it from the Treasury and altogether, because it will be at odds with its core mandate. These are public funds for construction works, for goods and or services. How they are used, we're talking about preferential issues now, procurement and the like, for the development of industry, well and good. But fundamentally, the mandate is how are we going to employ a system that is what? Fair, equitable, transparent, effective and competitive, using public monies. We then cannot look beyond Treasury. Having said that, Treasury should not have control of the institution, because Treasury itself could flout its own rules, could flout the laws that are applicable to it. Are you now saying I can be a player and the referee at the same time? That's why then it's important to establish the independence of the institution altogether, such that it can make a call against Treasury without the fears of the repercussions that we are seeing or that we could potentially see when one is located in the other, thus losing its own independence. This act is a standalone act that owes its fidelity only to the Constitution. Effect must be given to that.
Okay. No, very profound indeed. That's a very interesting perspective as well. So I take it that everyone has sort of exhausted their questions. I see we've got no more questions, and it would have been nice to actually have more procurement practitioners or supply chain professionals joining us in this discussion. But I would like to just thank everyone for your time, unless, of course, if there's still questions that I might have missed. Yes, I see Kumi has a hand raised there. Kumi, you can just come in.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity. Just thought I'll be the voice of the practitioners here, as I'm in public.
Oh, great.
Yes. Look, I try to look at this bill from both the business perspective as well as from as the practitioner's perspective, you know? And perhaps I could just, it's not really the questions, but just concerns on what I picked up. Can I do that?
Yeah, there's a lot of concerns than, solution. Go ahead, it's fine.
All right. On the business side, look, there's still the issue. I would have loved to see some pronouncement on set asides as an example. I thought the bill will be basically be non-apologetic about certain things like that set asides. We still have the issue of the participation in transversal contracts. It looks like it's going to be a bit stricter now, with departments not getting an option to opt out of a transversal contract. And we know the impact that has on small companies. I mean, if we take a simple example of the supply of toilet paper, you know, as a manufacturer down in Limpopo may have the capacity to supply toilet paper to a hospital within their area. But the minute you want to throw them into a competition at a national level, now you're going to start measuring their capacity to supply the entire country, as an example. So which basically you might end up disqualifying them because they are only able to produce X amount of toilet paper. So I think it's not supporting SMEs from that angle. There's the issue of the extension of validity. I think you'd have seen that. We still have that issue of having to get the bidders agreeing to the extension of validity. But my problem for SMEs is that if a department decides to extend validity, it is still at a cost to the SME because they are required to submit further securities, you know. So as practitioners or as departments, we delay in our processes, but that delay costs the SME. You understand where I'm coming from?
Correct.
So
yes.
Then on paragraph 34, that talks about, I found that very controversial. I think if I could just click to it. Paragraph 34 talks about the withdrawal and modification bid, right? And it gives the bidders an opportunity or a right to write to the institution that's procuring a service to say, before the bid is evaluated, to say, I need to do an amendment on that particular bid. I think we might have, we might be opening a can of worms there for possible litigation issues, because I mean, if I'm expected to publish the bidders' prices and so forth, and somebody can come in and say, look, in terms of paragraph 34, I need to make some modification to my bid. And to what extent are you going to allow that? So that's also a challenge for me. Then there's also areas where, just nitty-gritties where I feel like we are quite advanced as things are now, but we seem now to be going back with this bill. For instance, currently you have the CSD that's linked to CIP, to Treasury, that looks at the restricted suppliers, right? Yep. But now, in terms of this bill, it says before you award, you must write to the regulator to check if the bidder is not restricted. I mean, we are quite advanced as things are now. That process is automated. So why do we still need to go and write to this one and so forth? There's also the element of cancellation of a bid, of a tender, where, and one of the grounds is that where there is insufficient bids received, but then there's no indication of what is insufficient. If I get 3 bids, would that be regarded as insufficient? Do I make that determination myself? Do I basically disqualify those who responded because the other parties were not interested in the bid after giving them 4 weeks. So those are the some of the things I think that I picked up from the bill. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the wisdom. I really learned a lot, and the panel as well, the composition of the panel. It's just brilliant to have the legal minds, pointing out to certain things that, as practitioners, we tend to miss. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your contribution as well. Unfortunately, it's more concerns, more questions, and we, in terms of this platform, we're not really, in liberty to actually give any clarity to that. We're just critiquing the bill. But I think more than anything, what becomes very important is that there's still an opportunity to comment. The bill is still out there for public comments. If I'm not mistaken, the deadline is on the 30th of June. So I would like to once again say a big thank you to all our panelists and to everyone that actually made time to attend this great discussion. And looking at our list of participants, I don't see Dr. Sakile Manyati. So I would take it that he's not able to join us. And for the sake of time, I would like to just end, maybe before we close, any closing remarks from anybody, whether from our panelists or even the delegates, any closing remarks, then we bring this to an end. Going once, twice, thrice, and yes, so I take it that there is no further remarks, no consent. Oh, sorry, rather, no, there is no further remarks, no consent. Oh, sorry, rather, no concerns, no questions. We still had a little bit of time. But thank you once again, everybody, and for your time. May you be safe and just take care and make sure that, in terms of personal development, we continue to challenge our mindsets, to stretch our thinking. And for those that are entrepreneurship, I see we've got a chat, everything. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I was just saying that, I think if anything, what becomes even more critical during this uncharted season is that we all stay positive, we all stay healthy and safe, because that's one thing that is going to keep us going with life. With that being said, may you all have a great afternoon and stay blessed. Thank you.